fresh dill from the garden. What am I gonna do with all of this food? Hello and welcome back to Sage and Stone Homestead. My name is Heather and this is the first garden tour of the 2022-2023 fall and winter garden. Right now we still have quite a few remnants of the spring and summer garden left in the greenhouse and in our raised bed garden. The tromboncino squash, once it gets cold enough in this greenhouse, it is gonna go by the wayside. It is not frost hardy, but I have been starting to fill in the greenhouse with frost hardy vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbages. But for today I am going to be doing a harvest. Just so happens that I don't have anything fall and winter related to harvest. I'm still harvesting things from the spring and summer garden, so let's get on to it. I put these tromboncino in the greenhouse right around 2 to 3 months ago as starts, and we have huge 4-foot high squash right now. I'm hoping to get a few of these tromboncino squash to grow that nice hard rind that will allow me to keep them over winter. Right now the squash still have a really soft skin on them. When I put my finger on the rind here, you can see the indentation from my fingernail, and that means it's not ready for long-term storage. See, even this big one is still really tender, and I think that's one of the benefits of the tromboncino. It gets really huge and it's usable in its whole life cycle. So if I wanted to, I could chop this thing down right now and basically feed an entire army. The seeds inside the tromboncino squash are only in this lower portion here, and so the rest of the squash, the whole neck of it, is actually a nice, tender, very consistent type of texture. It's really beautiful and we do love it. So I'm only going to be saving the larger ones that I think have a possibility of getting the nice firm rind on it before we experience a killing frost inside the greenhouse. But some of the ones that I think probably don't stand a chance, we're going to be harvesting and using as summer squash. Over here on this side of the greenhouse is where we planted the broccoli last week. It has all transplanted out just fine. We didn't lose any of them to transplant shock, which is great. This side of the greenhouse, though, there are quite a few peppers. Most of these peppers are jalapenos. We're going to be harvesting those today. And the marigolds in here have really taken on a life of their own. They are all in just one row along the edge of the greenhouse here, but a lot of these plants just got really huge and they've started to infiltrate and take over the pepper rows. It's breaking my heart a little bit to think about taking out the marigolds because the local bee population is really loving the last few blooms that fall has to offer. This is the last of the bell peppers out of the greenhouse. There was actually a lot more left in here than I realized, and that is a really awesome thing. The rest of the row is jalapenos, and there's quite a few left on these plants too. I very classically misjudged the amount of peppers that were in the greenhouse, so I had to go back for a second harvest basket. Good problems. The next thing that I'd like to harvest is this lovely opal basil. We like to make freezer pesto out of our basil that we grow each year, and this basil is absolutely big enough and needs a pretty serious trim. I've actually never made pesto out of purple basil. I do wonder if it will turn brown in the freezer, but even then it should taste good. Smells great. Now that was a pretty serious haircut. I assure you that this basil will bounce back, and as long as the frost stays away here in the greenhouse, we should be able to get another harvest just like that in a matter of weeks. So what am I gonna do with all of this food? We've already talked about the basil pesto, and I'll go ahead and put the recipe and method on the screen right now. You can go ahead and pause the video, take a screenshot. It's really simple, but really worthwhile. My husband has really been enjoying the fermented jalapeno hot sauce that I made. I made a really hot sauce out of our habaneros last year, and he enjoys that hot sauce as well, but he says that the jalapeno version is more of an everyday hot sauce that he could see himself using all the time. And then I'm going to be probably using the squash and bell peppers, which are now buried fresh. I have diced and frozen about 7 to 9 gallon sized bags of peppers for our freezer. We have also pickled peppers in the past, and that's what I'm going to be doing with all of these habanadas. These have been my favorite pepper that I've grown this year. They have such an amazing fruity flavor, and I think they're going to lend very well to pickling. The walls of the habanada pepper are pretty thin. See that? The best way to pickle a thin-walled pepper like this to retain some of that crispness and structure is to ferment them. So in this jar here, I actually did just put in some of the peppers that we harvested earlier. They are in a fermentation brine with a little bit of fresh dill from the garden and a few spices. They're gonna sit in here for around a week, and then I can put them in the refrigerator. If you're unfamiliar with the process of fermenting this way, I will link a similar video to this process at the end of this video. Our lettuces and kale and things have gotten a really great jump start in the past couple of weeks. They experienced a little bit of transplant shock while they got their roots really deep in the ground, and now that their roots are settled, they're starting to grow a lot up above the ground. All of the lettuce in this bed, I'm actually growing for head lettuce, so I don't plan on harvesting these for salads really anytime soon. It'll probably be around a month before these lettuces head up well. But if you wanted to, you absolutely could start harvesting lettuce when it's at this size. What you're going to do is actually take some of the lower leaves and pinch those off at the base. When you harvest this way, you're going to want to leave about 3 to 5 leaves in the center of the plant so that it can still photosynthesize and grow. We've had some warm weather here, and so these lettuce leaves are good, but they are a tiny bit bitter. Greens and things are much better after they've gone through even just a light frost. It has something to do with the sugars in the plant becoming either more concentrated or more prevalent as a way for the plant to protect itself over winter. And of course, sugar tastes good, so it makes the leaves taste better. See our dinosaur kale? It was pretty puny a couple weeks ago, but we've got lots of upward growth now. In the beginning of the garden season, we actually grew potatoes in these 2 beds here. And when you grow potatoes, inevitably you leave some in the ground, whether you mean to or not. And it looks like we have quite a few potato plants popping up in the beds here where I have the greens, and I am just gonna leave them. Now, these tops will absolutely die back when we get our first frost, but the tubers underground will remain, and they're gonna pop up again as soon as they can springtime next year. Look at my honeybees. Freshly watered soil like that is actually a really great source of water and of salts for honeybees. Right now they're trying to cure their honey down to get ready for winter, and they do use collected salts around the whole environment for achieving that. My honeybees are out here gathering what they need, and I'm out here trying to figure out exactly what's going on with these starts that I started about 8 weeks ago. So these are all cool weather starts. Some of them are going to remain here in the raised bed garden, but many of them are eventually going to be planted in the greenhouse, and I'd like to get a few of them transplanted tonight. Now, problem being, I have up potted some of these plants from their small cell trays into bigger pots, and in doing so I tried to keep track what was what, which plants were which, but I think I have gotten a little bit confused. So I do have a couple of these marked as Brussels sprouts, so I can take a good look at the leaf structure and determining what is probably a Brussels sprout, and then move on from there. And why that's important to me is I actually plan to grow the Brussels sprouts outside here. They can kind of take a little while to get going, and the Brussels sprouts will probably be coming in strong in the springtime when I'm wanting to transplant like tomatoes and things into the greenhouse. So I have space to give them here in the raised bed garden that they can really take as much time as they need out here. So I want to get those squared away. So this one I marked. This is a Brussels sprout. They have nice rounded shovel-shaped leaves here. So I'm going to be looking for that leaf shape. See this one here, I've labeled purple broccoli. And you can see the difference in the leaf shape here. It's got a much more jagged leaf shape. So these are probably broccoli here. Looks like probably this whole side is Brussels sprouts. Down here I labeled things a little bit better. These are all cabbages. They do have a very similar leaf shape to the Brussels sprouts, but these are labeled, so that's helpful. And these ones, they have kind of a midway leaf shape in between the broccoli and the Brussels sprout. It is a little bit jagged on the edge, but it's also a little bit rounded yet elongated. And I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that that is the cauliflower, and that is what I want to put in the greenhouse tonight before we lose light. So let's grab this. Oh, hang on. It's the calamity show. Nah. Yes, you're right. Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So if you're here with us last week, you do know that we lifted up the weed fabric on the broccoli row and put down some amendments there. I'm actually not going to do that with this particular row. There were marigolds grown here this year, and while the marigolds did get really big and they put on lots of blooms, and I assume they did take up some nutrition, those marigolds are planted every 2 feet, so every other planting hole here, and I'm gonna take a risk and guess that I can use the planting holes that I didn't use over the summer and still get adequate nutrition for these cauliflower to grow well. Now, if I do get where I'm noticing that the cauliflower maybe isn't growing as well as it could, I can always put some fertilizer through my drip irrigation, or I have little tiny Job's fertilizer spikes that I can push down to give the plants that added nutrition. I was just remarking to my husband about how we haven't seen many large orb spiders or writing spiders around our house lately. And I am so excited to see this writing spider taking up refuge inside my greenhouse. She's gonna be safe here. She's gonna provide some pest control, and she's actually set up shop in a very out of the way spot. So we're not gonna get in each other's way, that's for sure. Thank you guys so much for joining me in the garden and the greenhouse this evening. If you're interested in seeing the fermentation process that I'm using for my habanadas, I'm gonna link this video up here. It is fermenting cucamelons, but the exact same process can be used for really any vegetable.